Welcome to another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Mike Roderick, and today we're doing our CEH V9. And specifically in this episode, we're going to be looking at hacking concepts, types, and phases. And here to walk us through all of that is Mr. Adam Gordon. How you doing, Adam?
I'm good. So hacking types, phases, and concepts. I didn't realize there was a distinction between them, but that's okay. We'll make something up as we go. And there is, actually. I'm just playing around. We're going to talk about hacking a little bit, continue our conversations with regards to how we define what hacking is. We're going to make a distinction in this episode with regards to hacking, and then later on we'll define ethical hacking, which is actually a little bit different, but is the focus, as hopefully you will come to know if you don't already, of what being a CEH, a certified ethical hacker, is all about. Being a hacker is in our world, being on the wrong side of this conversation, somebody who is up to no good, acting essentially in bad faith, using knowledge, expertise, and tools to take advantage of a system and exploit weaknesses or vulnerabilities in order to be able to gain access and compromise the system. But to do so without permission and without authorization, either from the customer, the owner, or whoever may be able to give them that right with regards to that system to help as opposed to hinder the defense of that system. Hackers, in other words, are bad people that are up to no good. Now, that's not to say that every hacker is evil, malicious, and acting out of, just sheer disrespect and or lack of concern for the people and the systems that they take on. Many hackers are simply doing this to see whether or not they can and have no ill will, no malicious intent, no any kind of malfeasance or none of that going on. And I want to be clear and I want to be fair. Many people that fall into this general category of hacking are not up to no good, are not looking to do harm, simply are lumped in because of a lack of understanding of that category and the subtlety of those definitions into this general thought process. Originally, the concept of being a hacker was really differentiated from the concept of being a cracker. And a hacker and a cracker were two distinctly different entities or roles that early on in computers and computer security evolved to discuss the bad actors versus the people that were looking to get into a system, assess it, understand it, probe the extent and the weakness of that defense, and then take steps to document what they found either for knowledge and or to then make the system more secure. We today generally just refer to everybody that does any of this kind of work as a hacker, but that's not actually 100% accurate. And it is a subtle but very important distinction. As a CEH, as a certified ethical hacker, we go out of our way to make the distinction that you are going to be somebody who is going to act with good in mind, who is going to take the defensive position in your organization, seeking to assess and to probe and to understand the limits of the defenses, but then to take that knowledge, often hard won and hard fought for, and apply it to the betterment of the defense of the organization. In other words, you will not act without permission on behalf of the network owner. You will seek permission before you seek to probe, before you seek to hack, before you seek to investigate and to understand by using this knowledge. And then you will take that information, whatever it is, and you will apply it to make the system more secure. That is an ethical hacker as we define it today. A hacker or a hacking episode today is seen as having a negative connotation associated with it, often information or acquisition of it and steps taken without the proper authority, without the proper prerequisite request for access and the granting of privilege to come in and probe the system is what hacking is talking about today. So I want to understand that we are exploiting system vulnerabilities and looking to compromise the security of a system through hacking and through certified ethical hacking. But the difference is that we're not going to take that exploit and use it to our advantage and compromise the system without documenting it and then finding some sort of control or way to patch for that and then assess that and apply that. The ethical hacker, in other words, takes that information that we find through hacking activities and gives it back to the organization in such a way that they can benefit from it. We want to understand this important but subtle difference because ethical hackers act specifically with this in mind. It is very important if you're ever asked at any point for any reason, inside of an exam or outside, under any circumstances, at any point in time, that as an ethical hacker, are you allowed to go and attack or probe or survey or even examine any system without permission? The answer is no, you are not. You must always have the permission of the system owner in some form, in some way, in order to engage in those activities. Meaning, this could be, and we'll get into the types of hacking activity that exist and that occur. This could be a blind, a double blind, kind of test. We sometimes call it white hat, black hat, gray hat hacking. We'll define those terms in a minute. It's referred to different ways. Zero knowledge, partial knowledge, full knowledge tests are also in that same category. If we have zero knowledge, we still have permission from the system owner. We're just not being given any information about the system at all. But we have been, and indeed must, be in touch with the system owner, and they've said to us, and we've said to them, we mutually agree, this is what we're going to do, this is the thing you want done, you've told me you want these systems to be profiled under these conditions, and you may or may not give me information about the system. I may have to figure that out for myself as the hacker. But as the ethical hacker, I'm given unequivocal permission to go and examine a system before I ever lay any kind of hand, virtually or physical, on it. If I don't have that get out of jail free card, as we often refer to it, that signed letter or that attestation from the system owner that I've been given rights to do that, I don't touch a system. This is a liability issue, right? If you operate in this environment, you understand you can be sued, and there are legal ramifications associated with hacking activity without permission. We want to be clear, want to be distinct, want to be unequivocal about this and this distinction for you. It's very, very critical, very important for you to understand that. Having said that, fine sir, I think we do have some vocabulary.
We do.
And some lists of types of hacking that we want to take a look at. We've already hinted at these. We want to just talk about them a little bit, give you some definitions of them. I talked about black hat, gray hat, white hat hacking a moment ago. Mentioned that it could also sometimes be referred to as zero, partial, or full knowledge, or blind, double blind hacking. These are all kind of the same terms. They float around in our industry often interchangeably. A black hat hacker is an individual that is going to have skills, that is looking to use them, certainly very knowledgeable in many cases, but is looking to use them, unfortunately, for evil as opposed to for good. Think of them as being a member not of the Rebel Alliance, but rather in Star Wars, right? They would be aligned with the dark side. So the Darth Vaders, right, of the world would be the black hats. These are the hackers that are looking to take their skills and are using them to hack, but to do so without the permission and without the express written authority of the owner of a system. They are attacking, in other words, as opposed to trying to do good, right? You saw no droids in that Land Rover. I'm going to let you go. Of course you're going to let me go, right? I love that whole thing Obi-Wan does.
I
with the
know.
hand.
If I could just master that.
Wouldn't that be awesome,
Yes.
right? Of course you want to go have Chinese tonight, right? Of course you want to go see that movie. Of course I can go play golf with my friends, right? Be awesome, wouldn't it? That would just be great. Except I don't play golf, right? All right, so we have black hat. What about gray hat hackers? So gray hat hackers kind of sit in between, right? You know, there's many shades of gray, as you probably are familiar with. And when we think about in between, what we're saying is that they sometimes will work on the dark side and sometimes on the white side or on the light side, meaning, you know, they may use their skills and their abilities for good, but they may also sometimes use them to get up to no good. And they can either be offensive or defensive in their thought process with regards to hacking and either having permission or occasionally perhaps going out on their own and doing things that they're not supposed to do, kind of that in-between area. Reality of our world is that sometimes we have to get up to no good in order to ultimately do good. I'm not saying that's a defense. I'm not suggesting for a minute that that is appropriate. I'm just talking about the reality of where we tend to find ourselves. White hat hacking is somebody who has, again, very good, very knowledgeable, very deep skills, right? Think of the black hat hacker. The white hat hacker is essentially the same thing, but the alternate ego. The person that is working for the organization, that seeks the permission, that goes to assess and then use that knowledge to try to protect those systems. Did you ever see the movie Wizards, the animated feature? Ralph Bakshi
I did not see
did
that.
the animation. He was the one that also did the animation on Heavy Metal. I don't know if you did Heavy Metal. So he did it before he did Heavy Metal. He did Wizards. It was basically like a Tolkien-esque, thing. It was not the Lord of the Rings. It wasn't the same kind of thing, but it was like that. It was a battle between dark and light, good and evil, between two wizard brothers, hence the term or the title. Really good. If you never saw it, it's about an hour and a half animated short. Awesome movie. But the concept of like the black hat, the white hat is really starkly defined in there with regards to the two wizards and how they battle. Really, really great movie. Really cool. All right, anyway, so we're here at the Hacking Film Fest 2016 here at IT Pro TV. Later on, we'll be interviewing. No, I'm only kidding, right? Let's continue on. So we have, what do we have up there next? Suicide hackers. Suicide hackers. So, a suicide hacker is a term, you don't often hear this term. This is not a term that I think you would probably find in average people's conversation on a regular basis today. It obviously, unfortunately, has some very, very tragic overlay consequences with the kind of things that we see going on in the world politically around the world today with regards to this kind of activity outside of the computer realm. And we're not necessarily talking about that activity, although it is aligned with the definition of this term. It's essentially a person who's looking to use their hacking skills to gain access to a system and is not going to worry about the consequences in terms of being caught, potentially. They're just willing to take a chance and hack, and if they're caught, so be it. You can kind of infer from that what we would imply. So this is an individual that has these kind of skills and is looking to get up to no good and do harm, but is not worried about the consequences or being caught, essentially, is what we would define that as. A script kiddie is a derogatory term with regards to, as I almost break my toe on the side of the table, with regards to in the hacking community with regards to being called this. If you call someone a script kiddie, you are insulting them. Let me be clear, this is not something you should do or do lightly. You're talking about people that can make the lights go off, literally and proverbially, all around you. So people that have those kind of skills, you don't want to upset, and you certainly don't want to insult unless you are prepared to do battle. So a script kiddie is essentially a derogatory term that can be used to describe somebody who doesn't have enough skills on their own to be able to hack, but rather has to copy other people's attack mechanisms and methodologies, download their code, their scripts, and essentially is a copycat, right? They can't do it for themselves. They've got to, essentially get the Hacking for Dummies book, right? And, be told what to do. That's what a script kiddie is. It's a very, as I said, derogatory term for an unskilled hacker, somebody who purports to have skills but really does not, and rather simply copies attacks that they find on the internet and uses them to pretend to be able to hack. People call other people script kiddies when they want to insult them, in other words. So not a term you should throw around or use lightly by any means. Cyber terrorists are individuals with a range of skills. Again, all these people would have hacking skills of some kind, but they are going to use their skills to carry out a political agenda of some kind, whatever that may be, whether it's right or wrong, whether we agree with it or not, whether it is in the defense of one or another ideology. We're really not talking about that here per se. We're simply talking about the fact that they are using their skills to pursue and carry out some sort of political agenda with regards to attacks or propagating attacks that may further that message in some way. State-sponsored hackers, these are hackers that work at the behest of a government or a military organization in a country. I mentioned in one of our prior conversations the U.S. Cyber Command and the defense mechanisms that many countries are building today with regards to hacking skills. And so we are not classifying those people in the same light per se, but when a military or government entity uses those skills specifically to go out and carry out attacks against another entity, a government, a military, and or a private sector business, they are essentially engaging in state-sponsored hacking, or state-sponsored hackers are being used. Not that we're pointing the finger at any one government or entity by saying this, but there are rumors, and have been for many years, that the North Korean government engages in this kind of activity. There's been a rash of recent bank thefts in the SWIFT wire transfer network over the last 8 weeks approximately, and they have been attributed to North Korea. And state-sponsored hacking, for instance, would potentially be at the heart of this. The Chinese government, the United States government, the Israeli government have all at various points been accused of engaging in this kind of activity against their perceived enemies and or threats at the time for a variety of reasons, perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly. Again, not trying to judge, just simply throwing out there some examples you may have heard of over the media in the last several years with regards to this kind of activity. Hacktivists are individuals, again, that look to go out and pursue some sort of agenda, whether it is a political agenda or not. But usually it's a political agenda. They probably are working on their own. They probably are not part of a government or military event or organization of any kind. They are most likely pursuing some sort of agenda on their own. Think of the Anonymous Collective, for instance. You would think of them as being a good example of hacktivism. We don't really know who they are. We don't know who makes them up. We don't know whether or not they are being operated by one individual, a group of individuals, semi-autonomous, fully autonomous from a government entity. Hard to know, but what we do know about them in theory on the surface points to the idea that they may very well be engaging in hacktivism, and indeed we often say that they are. That would be one example, right? We have James there. Good to see you, James. Glad to see that you're out there joining us and that you included Mike in that. You know, he gets really frustrated and upset when people don't acknowledge the fact that he's here and it's just me talking. So we appreciate you calling him out. Always good to have you.
Yes, thank you, James.
Always
I
good to have you.
appreciate
Here. Right. Couldn't do it without you. Actually, we could because we can't even see you on the screen. But we'd have to have somebody controlling the machine. But well, all kidding aside, we can't do what we do here without myself and the talented team of people that work with me when I present or any of our presenters. And Mike is an integral part of that, as are all the other members of the IT Pro TV family.
We thank you for that.
Want to make sure we recognize that. All right, now stop talking. Let me get back to what I'm doing.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so let's talk about hacking, and let's talk about hacking phases. You know, when we engage in hacking, and look at that. You're just on top of things, sir, you are. We have all the hacking phases laid out here. Mike was kind enough to document them for us before we got started today. I want to just remind you and go through review with you and update you on what they are. We have 5 distinct phases. There are 2 sub-phases under reconnaissance. Specifically, you'll see, but essentially the phases of hacking, right? The activities we engage in by structure, by area, by focus. Very important for you to know if you're engaging in or potentially thinking about studying for and engaging in the CEH exam. Ultimately, you're going to want to know the different kinds of hackers that we just discussed. You're going to want to know the different 5 phases of hacking: reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, and clearing tracks. As we talk about them in the 5 distinct phases, let's discuss what occurs in each phase. But it is really important to make sure we understand these and can knowledgeably and can comfortably describe each phase, the activities associated with them, couple of sentences about what we do, what the key takeaway from that phase is, how we hand off to the next phase, and why we must engage in the entire life cycle, all the phases start to finish, to truly understand how to engage in hacking, good or bad, ethical or not. Because if we just do recon, but we don't ultimately go through and focus on maintaining access, and ultimately as a result of that, get in, gain, and then maintain access, and then hide that activity through clearing tracks when we're done, we're not going to be able to execute fully on that information we find, or we may, but we may actually be uncovered as a result of the activities we engage in. So we have to really think about this as a life cycle, and any life cycle has these distinct phases, whatever they are, and we want to understand them in order, making sure we understand how they work. Let's start with reconnaissance up at the top there. When we think about reconnaissance, we're thinking about gathering information. So we are going out, we are examining things that may be of interest to us. We're looking for publicly available information that may be valuable to us. So for instance, can we do a quick live demo while
Absolutely.
we are on your machine? Can you open up Google real quick for
Sure.
us? All right, so we're just going to go out, just give Mike a second to get set up. We hadn't planned for this particular one, but want to just show you the idea behind what we could do in the reconnaissance phase. So can you search for, let's go to the Whois database, and let's do a lookup real quick for the name registration records for itpro.tv.
All right.
Shouldn't really talk about anything if we're not willing to put ourselves on the line here. So Mike's going to take just a second to get into the Whois and Aaron database. We're going to look up itpro.tv. What we're doing is just while he's typing, while we're getting in there, we're going to look for the domain name registration for the itpro.tv domain. And we're going to take a look at what information is out there. And we're going to, I said we're going to zoom in a little bit. Great. We're going to see what information may be available. And this is just one very basic, but very important way to do some recon. Let me explain what I mean by that based on what we see. So I see domain name itpro.tv. I've got a unique identifier for the registration in the domain database. Doesn't really matter what that is. The Whois server that's there, that's giving us information at 2Cows. I remember when 2Cows was just a software site. 2Cows is now providing all sorts of good stuff. I go back and date myself every so often, but those of you who've been around doing this long enough, you remember that before Computer World and all the other download sites, 2Cows was the shareware site. All right, so we have some information, reference URL, that's nice. We've got the IANA ID. That's all great. What we then have is a bunch of name servers that are there. We could see there's 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken, and we could see them listed. Now, in and of itself, that may not be good or bad information, but it actually can be valuable paired with something else that Mike was just hovering over and pointing to, which is the DNSSEC, and I believe it says unsigned there, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. DNSSEC registration information. So these 2 pieces of information in and of themselves, by themselves, also versus taken collectively, can be very telling. Let's talk about what we learn here for a minute. So we have name servers. Now, back in the old days, and we haven't tried this and we're not going to try this now, but I'm just going to describe to you what an NSLOOKUP approach may be to reconnaissance here, and we'll take a look at NSLOOKUP as a tool in one of our upcoming demos later. NSLOOKUP is a command line tool that you can use to go out and essentially query DNS servers. We use it to maintain DNS servers all the time, to do remote administration on them. A lot of you may use a GUI interface like the Windows DNS console, the MMC, to be able to do administration, but we've been able to do this for years from the command line with NSLOOKUP as well. NSLOOKUP can be used to do a variety of things. We can use it to talk to any of those name servers, and by setting our NSLOOKUP server to seem like it is authoritative, and then ask that any one of those name servers, without going into the details of how we would do this, but to be able to essentially say to any of those name servers of record there, hey, I'm your buddy, you should talk to me. Can you transfer the zone information for this particular domain to me, because I'd like to see it. If the zone transfer settings on that zone have not been set up to not allow talking to strangers, essentially unrestricted zone transfers, and today, thankfully, more often than not, we don't allow this to occur. But there was a time, and not that long ago, where the standard setting was talk to anybody. And as a result, you could essentially connect to a database like this. You could get the DNS name registration information. You could go nail any one of those servers through NSLOOKUP, get a complete zone transfer. You would get a zone dump, as we would call it. You would get all the zone records. You would be able to see all of the registration information for all of the host records, the MX records, the CNAME records, essentially the PTR pointer records, and any other record that may be there. Now, what that data would give you is a very detailed map of the entire layout of the internal network that DNS server was servicing through that namespace, and it would tell you the name as well as the IP address of every machine behind that firewall or that group of firewalls on the border of that network. I would not have to hack in, push past the firewalls and the gateway devices to get that information. It's a lot tougher to do today. And believe it or not, every so often, and it's not so rare, I do a lot of this kind of work. I do a lot of assessment work for customers all the time. I am constantly finding customer registrations that are not protected out there. And we profile this as part of a pen test. We do this as part of an audit traditionally, depending on the kind of audit we're doing. We certainly do this as part of a vulnerability assessment against common infrastructure that's hosted externally. And we look for this. If we could find a namespace that is managed by a provider that does zone transfers, you've got a problem, and we will tell you. Adding DNSSEC to the mix, the fact that DNSSEC is not being used potentially is problematic, because it means that there are certain situations where we may not be able to validate beyond a reasonable doubt what the origination of the DNS information is, and or the provider of that DNS information may not be able to validate properly to the level that we assume they should to show us whether or not they're legitimate. And also the people that look to update DNS information can also potentially not be validated properly if we're not using DNSSEC. And that adds an additional layer of security that is relatively easy to implement. And I'm sure at some point we'll talk a little bit about DNSSEC and why it's so valuable. But if you're not using it, it's a big miss from the security perspective, because it adds additional layers of complexity and security to the DNS name registration information. Now, in and of itself, it's not a big deal if it is or is not being used just because of the zone transfer information. We're not looking at that right now with DNSSEC, because DNSSEC protects against something different, right? It forces us to digitally sign the DNS name registration information to further protect it and validate it to make sure it's not being spoofed. Zone transfers are a separate thing from DNSSEC, but the two together are very telling when we look at recon in the hacking phase, right? So we want to know that. Can we go back to the screen for just a minute? Do we also have any registration information with regards to who owns the registration there?
Not
you may have it
this one.
off to the side on the right. I don't know what was there. Does it give us the the actual name of the registrant and the contact info?
It does not.
All right, you may have to go to another site. You get it. We don't have to pull it up now, but just know that you can also go out and look for that if you go to one of the other. You can go to ICANN and or the ARIN sites. There's a lot of different sites around the world that will do this, and if you pull that up, you can get not just what we saw, but actually the name of the person who registered, the information with either GoDaddy or whoever it was that's the DNS provider, and you actually can get contact info. And again, you'd be surprised how often we could tell something from that. We can get, for instance, the email address configuration that your company uses. We can get the phone number for the company. We can get the address of the headquarters. We could find out who the IT professional is traditionally that is managing that, and we may be able to use that identity and assume that identity to take on information gathering capabilities in other areas of the network. And this is just one tool. Imagine going out and just Googling for information about a company, looking up the company and the individuals associated with it in LinkedIn, looking them up on Facebook. These are the kind of things we would do with hacking when it comes to reconnaissance. All the publicly available information that's out there is what we would want to try to gather. Taking that information and then putting it into the blender to find out what it tells us is part of that. And we have two types. If you remember the list that Mike had, we had passive and active reconnaissance. And there's an important differentiator between the two. When we think about passive reconnaissance, we're thinking about finding this kind of information that we were doing without actively touching the target. We're just gathering available information, aggregating it up. We're looking, but we're not touching. We're window shopping, in other words, right? When we think about active reconnaissance, we're interacting with the target directly. We may be taking that recon to the next level by actually going in, trying to attach ourselves to one of those DNS name servers and trying to do a zone transfer. That would be active recon, as opposed to passive recon, which was just going to the WHOIS or the ICANN database or whatever and trying to pull up that information. So we want to have a differentiator between the two, want to make sure we are comfortable thinking about those two distinct kinds of reconnaissance that take place and differentiating between them. Okay? Want to think about scanning as our next phase. And I know we have the list. Want to define probably what scanning is, or at least put it up there so people can see it. I don't know what you were up there and doing. You're just keeping track of everything. And okay. Well, didn't we have the whole list though?
Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
phases.
the list.
Yeah,
the phases, right? We already had the list, right?
Yep.
Or just stay with what we already have. All right. Why reinvent the Word document when we already have one there? All right, so when we're thinking about scanning, the second phase down, remember overall phase number 2, active and passive are sub-types of recon, so they're just types of the recon phase. When we think about scanning, we're thinking about going out, again, pre-attack. We have not attacked yet. All this activity, recon and scanning, is all about the pre-attack stuff that goes on to set us up to be successful. We're going to go out and we're going to take a look at information that we've gotten during recon, and we're going to try to then probe the edges of the network to figure out what we can do to get in. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where are the weaknesses? We may use port scanning software, for instance, something like SuperScan, which is just a port scanning tool. We may go in and use something like What's Up Gold, right? A tool like that. We may use a tool like Angry IP Scanner. These are just all tools that we can use and we can actually go in and we can play with to find information about the system and see what services are running, what ports are open, what IP addresses may be available, what points of entry will be available to us that we can leverage and we can use. That's what scanning is. Again, this is pre-attack. We're warming up, right? We're touching things, but we're not in active attack mode yet. Then we're going to go to gaining access, right? Our next phase, phase 3. Gaining access is where we will talk about going active. This is where we actually seek to attack, right? So the idea is we're going to take all the information, all of the knowledge we've gathered in recon and scan, where we've been stealthily probing and looking, and we're now going to take that and we're going to leverage that to gain access to and exploit one or more systems and own them, take them over, right, and try to take control. We may go in and exploit vulnerabilities or weaknesses at various levels. The operating system, the application, we may put rootkits in and try to subvert the system at the kernel level. There's all sorts of stuff we could do, right? We may try to put malware and remote access tools in some sort of RAT, remote access toolkit, may be placed on the system. We may keep an open channel, or we may just simply touch the system once, walk away. So gaining access and maintaining access, the next phase, can be part of the same activity chain or can be distinctly different. We may choose to get in once and that's it, or we may want to get in and stay there and maintain access long term. Maintaining access is all about keeping control, keeping open that pipe that we've broken open into the system by finding a vulnerability. So it's one thing to get in, it's another thing to stay there. We may put keyloggers in place. We may put in remote access Trojans, like I mentioned, rats and/or some sort of rootkit or zombie type system software that could be put there to maintain control over that box on demand, and then wake it up and grab it when we need it, and then obviously over time be able to profit from that. And then finally, clearing tracks is all about removing evidence of what we did. We may go in and we may decide to delete log files, right? We may go in and hide the malicious activities we've been involved with. We may want to cover up continuing access over time. We may want to be able to get rid of suspicious information that was left there, install files, things like that. There's all sorts of stuff, right? We're always going to try, if we're smart, to hide our identity and try to prevent the people that are going to come and forensically examine the system when we're done with it from finding what we're doing. So we want to cover up those tracks if possible. We may have software we use to remove evidence of our activities. We may decide to uninstall certain software. We may decide to create fake log entries. We may decide to blow up the system, obliterating, in theory, any and all evidence of what we did. If it's a router, we may decide to modify the running config of the system, leaving behind no evidence when we restart the router, except the fact that it was restarted, wiping out the running config, because it'll be loaded from the stored config, and therefore the modifications will disappear. There's lots of ways we can hack in, do a bunch of stuff, and then cover our tracks when we're done. The best people that do this and that can get away with anything are people you never see. They're ghosts. You never know they were there because they're so good at what they do and so good at covering their tracks that you have no idea that they've ever been there in the first place. Hacking, whether you're doing it as a certified ethical hacker or on the dark side, at the end of the day, the skills are the same. You got to understand how to get in and get out without getting caught, right? That's the idea. And by the way, take advantage of vulnerabilities along the way to make your job easier in the sense you could exploit weaknesses. The best hackers in the world are people that don't talk about what they do, which in and of itself is not realistic for most human beings. They don't brag, in other words, right? They don't tell people what they did. They just do it, put their head down, and then they go on to the next job. Right? So the people that talk about how good they are typically not the people that are good at doing this, right?
Right.
I mean, they may be good, don't get me wrong. People can be braggadocio and be very, very good at what they do and just want to brag about it, right? And that's okay in theory if you don't mind sitting and listening to them. But the reality is you don't have to brag about being good to be good. You just have to be good. And the people that are really good are the people that keep their mouths shut and just go on about their business and you never see them coming, right? Mm-hmm. They're just ghosts. And those are the people you got to watch out for because those are people that can kill you without you even realizing it. And those are the ones that CEH, certified ethical hackers, have the hardest time defending against because those are the cyber attackers that are able to get in and out of systems almost at will and are incredibly difficult to find because they don't tend to leave behind a lot of telltale evidence as to what they're doing, more often than not.
All right, Adam, very good look at the different concepts of hacking. We took a look at the different phases of that hacking life cycle, if you will, and then the different classes of hackers, black hats, white hats, script kiddies, so on and so forth. So we thank you for that. Some great, again, foundational knowledge that we're building up as we move through this series of videos. Hope everybody out there enjoyed watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Mike Roderick.
I'm a ghost.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care.